Coming up on Bridge City News, the Stampede City is still reeling from a devastating storm which caused millions of dollars in damage. The Trudeau Liberals look at possibly extending the emergency response benefit beyond 16 weeks. And we hear about the significance of two types of flags that were raised today in Lethbridge.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta's Health Minister Tyler Shandro announced today that our province has officially lifted the public health emergency. There were 20 new COVID-19 cases and just one new death reported over the past 24 hours.
While the state of emergency is lapsing, it does not remove or impact the existing orders that Dr. Hinshaw has put in place. Nor does it impact her ability to issue additional orders as they may be needed in the days ahead. All ministerial orders amending legislation made under Section 52.1 continue for a period of 60 days unless they are terminated sooner. Now, while the public health emergency formally expires today, COVID is still with us, and we must all still remain vigilant. And as we must still be prepared to respond if we see a significant increase in cases throughout our province. And now, to that end, we'll introduce legislation later this week to ensure that we have the power to respond to the pandemic as it's needed.
Calgarians are still cleaning up after one of the deadliest storms in recent memory. Car windows were smashed and vinyl siding on homes were destroyed by hail during the nasty storm which pummeled the Stampede City over the weekend. There was also major flooding on Deerfoot Trail as cars were seen submerged. Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi tweeted that his own home was hit hard by hail and that city crews were continuing to clear drains and clean up from all of the flooding. Fire officials say there were 23 rescue calls, including 2 where firefighters had to use an inflatable raft to ferry people to safety. Tornadoes and hail were also recorded in other areas of southern Alberta, including Taber and Barnwell. The weather warning from Environment Canada was cancelled around 9:40 p.m. after the storm weakened. Marshall Awasa was last seen by his relatives in Lethbridge on November 17th of 2019. Ever since then, the Lethbridge Police Service has been trying to locate him. Pemberton Police found his burnt-out truck on November 25th in BC's backcountry. Now, the search was halted during the winter, but just last month, Pemberton Police conducted a search of the area and ended up finding no additional evidence. A new search will be started again soon. Lethbridge Police say they have received tips from all over Canada, but that none of the tips were able to substantiate that it was actually Marshall Awasa.
People, especially when there's a high-profile investigation, people want to help out the police, and we are open to any information that's forwarded to us. Regarding sightings of him specifically, I can corroborate or tell you that we have had sightings of him in multiple different areas, often at the exact same time. So what we're getting at with that, what the information we're trying to release is that we will look into any reported sighting, but as of now, we have not had any essentially credible sighting of him, and every piece of information or sighting that we have been able to follow up with where we actually found that person that was reported being Marshall Awasa was not Marshall. Police
are asking anyone with information to please come forward. A second person is facing murder charges in connection with the deaths of a Cree Métis hunter and his uncle. RCMP say further review of evidence by the Crown that was gathered during the investigation resulted in 56-year-old Roger Bilodeau of Glendon being charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. 31-year-old Anthony Bilodeau of Glendon already faces 2 counts of second-degree murder and has pleaded not guilty. Police say 39-year-old Jacob Sansom and his 57-year-old uncle Maurice Cardinal were killed March 27th near Glendon, which is located about 200 kilometers northeast of Edmonton. Police say several shots were fired after the occupants got into a verbal and then a physical confrontation. Roger Bilodeau will appear in provincial court on Thursday. Lethbridge City Council met today to discuss the potential of joining in a $10 billion class action lawsuit against pharmaceutical companies who are allegedly responsible for distributing opioids, which led to the current opioid crisis. City officials say it's important to add our city to the lawsuit.
Holding somebody accountable is important. Having a decision saying that the drug manufacturing companies were active protagonists in this issue. We're a city of 100,000 people, and this is probably the most significant health crisis that we have faced in more than 100 years. That, I think, is important in my personal opinion, because I don't believe there's a city in Alberta that has been more significantly impacted than Lethbridge.
Lethbridge City Council also voted 7-2 in favor of putting forth a bid for the 2022 Briar. The two who voted against it were councillors Joe Morrow and Belinda Croson. Croson says the $1 million could be better spent elsewhere.
We are 4 times less per capita funding on social programs than Medicine Hat does, and we have greater social issues. So one of the things we need to look at as council is, with a finite money, where do we put it? And I would prefer it goes into social issues than into a curling event. But now that the event has passed council, if we get the Briar, I will of course be supporting it and hoping to have the best possible Briar.
Businesses are struggling, employees are struggling. I think by 2022 it'd be time for a great shot in the arm for the economy. A great time to basically publicize Lethbridge. We need to be talking about positive things and great things that our city does, and publicize all the assets that we have in our city. Continue to showcase Lethbridge as a city that can host national events.
It was a pretty windy one during the National Indigenous Peoples Week flag-raising event. City officials, Lethbridge Police and First Nations groups were all present for the occasion. BCN's Ainsley O'Reilly was also there and explains the significance of a week that celebrates our Indigenous neighbours, past, present, and future.
Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman says that National Indigenous Peoples Week is a good benchmark for seeing what has been done and what needs to be done in order to build relationships with our First Nations community.
Let's be honest, we have some challenges in terms of equity, access to opportunity, racism, employment and housing.
4 months ago, the city hired Pamela Beebe as the Indigenous Relations Coordinator.
To me, it looks like having people like myself employed here, people who are Black employed here, people of color who are employed here. That's what it looks like to me.
We want to see Indigenous people working in all occupations in the city of Lethbridge, and the city itself has to be a leader.
The Lethbridge and area Métis community came to the flag raising as well, sharing the importance of supporting the Blackfoot community and educating people about their cultural differences.
Facts matter, and details about people matter. You know, we don't have pan-Indigenous perspectives, that we don't share everything, but the one thing we do share is an appreciation for our unique cultures. And so what matters for young people and what matters for everybody, people who may not be Indigenous, is recognizing the distinct, the similarities and the differences that different Indigenous groups have.
As a coordinator, I should be coordinating all the different Indigenous people working in all those different departments. We have some work to do.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Another flag was raised in the city today as Pride Week kicked off. Lethbridge College students and staff held a special ceremony in order to celebrate diversity and inclusion, particularly for those in the LGBTQ2+ community.
The significance really of the flag is that we can make that statement about that we are a safe community, we are creating that safe environment, that we are committed to equity, diversity, inclusion, and particularly around the LGBTQ+ community.
We need to understand that we're still united, and there's still a place for everyone. It's a crazy year unlike any other. I mean, inclusion is important all the time, but especially right now when everyone's uncertain, it's really important to know that they have a safe place to go, and that they have a place to go where they're going to be included and they're going to be part of something together.
You know, it's times like these where many tap into the power of prayer for solace and strength. A Lethbridge man started an organized prayer walk called the Jericho Walk that through the power of social media has expanded into the United States. Larry Shilley says unity really helps to create community and says prayer will help you get through anything.
We need prayer. There's so much fear, there's so much anxiety, there's so much depression, and there's so much crime, and there's so much addiction that prayer is the only answer that is going to solve this kind of stuff. It has nothing to do with me. It's just the grace of God that has caused people's hearts to rise up and begin to take back our cities, take back our governments, take back our province, take back our country. We're in serious problems, and this is not going to solve itself. We need the people of God to really rise up and take back what has been stolen from us.
There are many ways to relieve stress, and axe throwing is one of them. True North Axe Throwing in Lethbridge has reopened. As Micah Quinn explains now, axe throwers will once again be able to work off stress while focusing on hitting those bullseyes.
True North Axe Throwing will be booking appointments starting today, and the co-owner of the store, Tanner Kenny, says he's excited to finally be back and being able to offer up axe throwing to customers once again.
Yeah, after those months that we were shut down, all of us here at True North Axe Throwing are very excited to finally get the chance to be open, to have the chance to compete in the sport we love playing, but also to be able to give back to the community and provide the community with an opportunity to throw axes again.
Axe throwing developed in 2008 in Ontario and the Greater Toronto region.
Since then, the sport has grown internationally, where it's now in many countries throughout the world. And it's a chance for anyone who wants to come have a good time, similar to what a dart hall would be, a little bit more Canadian though.
Kenny says that customers can expect the company to take as many precautions as they possibly can.
From sanitizing our axes, from encouraging social distancing, to really putting everyone's health first is the way that we're going to be able to, and the way we feel are going to be able to have success while reopening during this pandemic.
The first 10 to 15 minutes of the booking is when you will be introduced to your coach, and they'll get you comfortable before you start a match. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
A small town in central Alberta attracted around 300 people over the weekend to fight racism in a Black Lives Matter march. Innisfail Mayor Jim Romaine says he never considered his town racist. A local activist there says she deals with racism each and every day.
If you want to make a change, you listen to Black people with humility. You go and educate yourselves. And then you support Black people in everything we do, whether it's messy or not, because white people are messy. It's all over the TV. We have lots of TV shows with messy white people, and you love it. Love Black people the same. Don't do stuff for us. Ask us. Don't decide that we need this. No, we'll tell you what we need, because we have not been able to use our full voices and live at our full capacity and look at all the amazing things that we've done.
Less than 24 hours after a black man was killed by an Atlanta police officer, the city's police chief has resigned.
For the third time in just 2 weeks, I have spent the better part of a day reviewing video footage involving allegations of excessive use by members of the Atlanta Police Department. Tragically, the most recent incident involved the fatal shooting of a 27-year-old man, Rayshard Brooks. What has become abundantly clear over the last couple of weeks in Atlanta is that while we have a police force full of men and women who work alongside our communities with honor, respect, and dignity, there has been a disconnect with what our expectations are and should be as it relates to interactions with our officers and the communities in which they are entrusted to protect.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says details will be announced this week on a plan to extend the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. The COVID-19 aid program allowed Canadians to access the $2,000 monthly benefit for 16 weeks. Millions are still without jobs and are about to max out on their claim eligibility. The NDP say the CERB extension is a requirement for their support of a massive government spending proposal due to be debated in the House of Commons on Wednesday.
We believe that there needs to be an extension of CERB, that it's not acceptable for millions of Canadians to not know what's going to happen, and we want to find a way forward, and we're having negotiations about the fact that the government needs to release a plan on how they're going to help Canadians in this crisis when there's no jobs to return to. So this is fundamental for us moving forward.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says a blood donation ban on many in the LGBTQ2+ community is discriminatory, but he says if changes are to take place, they must be anchored in science. NDP MP Randall Garrison has filed a motion in the House of Commons calling on Ottawa to lift the ban.
The policy on MSM blood donations has long been discriminatory. But we know, and Canada has learned through strong, unfortunate experience, that the safety of our blood supply is something that we have to anchor in science. And that's why when we got elected in 2015 with a commitment to end the blood donation ban, we heard that the science was not there to be able to do it. We said, okay, well, here's millions of dollars for the Canadian Blood Services and Héma-Québec to do the research necessary to be able to eliminate that ban safely so that we can still have a safe blood supply and we can move forward on ending discrimination against the LGBT community. We have made significant steps forward. We will continue to anchor our decisions in science and protections of Canadians. But as I've said, we will work to end this discrimination.
The first official day of summer is just around the corner. Can you feel it? Educators and parents are learning that fickle internet connections, lack of supervision, and the lure of warmer weather prevent some students from taking part in online learning during the coronavirus pandemic.
Parents are finding that as the summer comes, it's getting tougher to get the kids to stay motivated and to complete their work. So some of it is because of the time of year, because it is summer, but we also are looking at the fatigue of doing a lot of online learning. Janina, we can do virtual hugs like this, okay? Do an air hug. Do you know why? You know why? We miss him, and we miss him being around his friends. I wanted to come and talk to you about your work. Are you enjoying doing your work online?
Yes.
Okay. And do you get to see Miss Paradise?
Yeah.
Okay, Miss Paradise wants to make sure that you log in and you try to do your work through Clever.
Yeah.
This is a bit challenging for me. You know, I have to stay home all the time to be with you, you know, to help him with his assignment and all of that. So it is very challenging, you know.
It's so hard to think about school with the warmer temperatures, but you know, we're getting closer and closer to the first official day of summer. Over the next few days, however, it'll feel more like spring with wet weather on the way. Full weather details are on deck. Now, if you live in Calgary, you may still be cleaning up from that nasty storm which caused severe flooding, hail damage to homes and cars, and in some parts of southern Alberta, damaged crops. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, Lethbridge also received some rain over the weekend, and more is expected by midweek.
Yeah, actually that rain's going to be beginning Tuesday evening, and we'll see rain possibly right through to Thursday night. But tonight the skies will be clearing. We will see some wind gusts up to 50 km per hour. 7 degrees is the overnight low. Into tomorrow, 19 is the high with a mix of sun and cloud. And then that rain is going to begin starting Tuesday evening and right through Wednesday. We're going to be seeing a 60% chance of showers through Wednesday night and all the way into Thursday. 16 the high for Wednesday, 14 for Thursday, 19 is the expected high on Friday, 21 on Saturday, and next Sunday a lovely 26 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So next weekend, not too bad as we get that rain out of the way during the middle of the week. I'll take that. I'll take a decent weekend for sure if we can get rid of that rain. The average high this time of year, 22 degrees, average low 9. 32 was the highest temperature, and that was in 1961, and the lowest was 2 degrees. That was in 1994. The sun woke up this morning at 5:23 a.m. and our evening sunset will be at 9:41 p.m. Now let's take a look across the country as we move into the west coast. We'll be seeing chance of showers there as we look to Victoria, and as always, extra windy in the Straits of Juan de Fuca. That area always seems to get a lot of wind. 18 degrees is the high, mix of sun and cloud in Vancouver. 17 the high. Edmonton's high 21 with a mix of sun and cloud. Chance of showers beginning tomorrow in Edmonton and Calgary, much the same as Lethbridge. We're going to see those showers from Tuesday right through till Thursday. Rain expected tomorrow in Saskatoon, high of 21. 25 the expected high in Regina. They could see a possibility of a thunderstorm. Same thing for Winnipeg as they see that rain start to build up tomorrow and could see a possibility of a thunderstorm. Sunshine in Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. Look at those temperatures, 24 in Toronto, 26 in Ottawa, and a lovely 28-degree day over in Montreal. As we look into Atlantic Canada, 27 the high for Fredericton, 24 for Charlottetown, Halifax, sunshine and 26 degrees. They could see some fog dissipating into the coast later on in the morning. And St. John's, Newfoundland will see periods of rain and a high of 17 degrees. So there you go. That is your forecast.
Canada's largest movie exhibitor says it plans to begin showing movies in Alberta next week. Cineplex says it will begin a gradual return to business following a COVID-19 related shutdown by opening 6 locations in the province on June 26th. No word yet on which ones they are. The company then hopes to reopen on July 3rd in as many other markets across the country as governments and health authorities will allow. The rollout will include new measures such as reserved seating in all auditoriums and staggered show times to reduce congestion in its theater lobbies. The plans for reopening come 3 days after UK-based Cineworld's $2.8 billion acquisition of Cineplex fell through. Trans Mountain says oil is flowing again through its pipeline after as much as 190,000 litres of light crude spilled from a pumping facility in Abbotsford, BC. A statement from the Crown-owned company says the pipelines restarted yesterday afternoon. An investigation into the leak continues, but Trans Mountain has linked the cause to a fitting on a 2.5 centimeter pipe and says the oil was contained, recovered, and slated for disposal. When it comes to talk of eliminating fossil fuels altogether, it's a dangerous discussion. Now that's according to Calvin Beisner of the Cornwall Alliance. He says there's a major cost involved with going with just green energy.
By pushing fossil fuels out of our energy mix, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to raise the cost of energy because the fossil fuels are the cheapest source aside from nuclear and hydro. They're much cheaper than wind and solar when you count everything into the price. But two, we're also going to make that energy less reliable. The wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining. And because of that, you don't have a steady input of energy into the electric grid. That means you have an unstable grid. The more unstable it is, the more you're going to have brownouts and blackouts, and those things kill.
Catch the full interview with Dr. Beisner and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up after business news. The Canadian Real Estate Association says home sales in May were down close to 40% over the same month last year. The group says, however, that sales did increase by 56.9% from April's record low. The average sale price dropped 2.6% from May from last year to almost $495,000. A Vancouver cannabis company is going to need a new name and logo after losing a legal battle with retailer Toys R Us. A federal judge ruled Herbs R Us Wellness Society used Toys R Us's registered trademark in a way that damages the goodwill attached to it. Toys R Us argued that Herbs R Us's green logo with its cannabis leaf in the middle uses a similar font and arrangement of letters as the toy store. The judge says the cannabis dispensary must destroy any goods and packages that bear the similar logo. He ordered the company to compensate Toys R Us for $15,000 in damages and $15,000 more for court costs. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 103 points on the day to 15,359. The Dow was up 157 to 25,763. The S&P 500 was up 25 points to 3,066. The Nasdaq was up 137 on the day to finish at 97.26. Oil was up 84 cents to 37.10 per barrel. Natural gas was down 6 cents to $1.67. Gold was down a cent to $17.25.15 an ounce, and silver was even on the day at $17.39 an ounce. Wheat is at $245 per metric ton, barley's at $246, canola's at $468, and corn is at $232 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 68 cents to $96. Feeder cattle were up 8 cents to $131.18, and lean hogs were up 60 cents to $52.28. The Canadian dollar was up slightly on the day to finish at 73.71 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says details will be announced this week on a plan to extend the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. The COVID-19 aid program allowed Canadians to access the $2,000 monthly benefit for 16 weeks. Millions of people are still without jobs and are about to max out their claim eligibility. Is it good for Alberta and Canada to phase out of the oil and gas industry and focus more on green energy? Dr. Calvin Beisner with the Cornwall Alliance says absolutely not, and shares his thoughts next with BCN's Jeanette Rocher.
The environment has made many worldwide headlines. Joining me now to discuss the issue is Dr. Calvin Beisner, national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance, a group made up of natural scientists, economists, and theologians. Dr. Beisner, welcome to the show. We are so happy to have you on today.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be on the program with you.
All right, and I should have mentioned to you, you're joining us from Memphis, Tennessee, correct?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Now, since this is right up your alley, why don't you tell us, in your opinion, what makes a true environmentalist?
Well, I think a true environmentalist is simply somebody who thinks, I want to make my life the kind of life that leaves the earth a better place than when I entered it. We put it this way, that As Christians involved in this, we take very seriously the instruction from God to human beings in Genesis 1:28 that we are supposed to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over it, or rule it. But we don't want that ruling, that dominion, to be abusive, to be exploitative. Rather, we want it to reflect the way that God rules his creation. And what we see in the earlier verses of Genesis 1 is that God makes everything out of nothing. He brings light out of darkness, order out of chaos, life out of non-life, great variety of life. He instructs all the different forms of life to be fruitful and highly fecund. This is the kind of thing that we should be doing ourselves. So we describe this godly sort of dominion as men and women created in God's image, working together to enhance the fruitfulness and the beauty and the safety of the earth to the glory of God and to the benefit of our neighbors.
Now, you have written a book called Creation Stewardship, Evaluating Competing Views, in which you mention in that book that it's dangerous to put people or celebrities on a pedestal, such as someone like Greta Thunberg. So why do you say that?
Well, frankly, we need to actually know a lot about what it is we talk about when we pretend to give other people advice. And too often, celebrities, whether it be someone as young as Greta Thunberg, who began speaking out on these things at age 16, or Hollywood celebrities, many of them really, frankly, have never learned in great depth about these issues. I've been studying these issues since the mid-1980s, so it's 35 years in this, and even so, there are parts of this where I would not seek to speak out as an expert. I realize the limits of my own knowledge. So what we need to do is to go to people who really have true expertise on these things. That's why I put together the Cornwall Alliance the way we did. We have just under 70 scholars in our network. About a third are natural scientists, including some of the world's top climate scientists. About a third are economists and policy wonks, and about a third are theologians and philosophers. So we try to bring all of those different insights together to address highly complex problems. And if we don't bring the different disciplinary backgrounds together, we're likely to have rather narrow, superficial approaches to solving very difficult problems.
Mm-hmm. Now, you wrote an interesting piece on your blog with the headline, Global Average Temperature Plummets, Tropical Temperature Fall, third biggest on record. Were you trying to make a point there?
The point is not that that proves that global warming isn't real. No, it doesn't prove any such thing. The point instead is that what we get in the climate debates is that the advocates of the notion of catastrophic anthropogenic global warming, man-made global warming that is catastrophic, will point to every heat wave, every temporary uptick in temperature as evidence that global warming is not only real, but is potentially catastrophic, that it is overwhelmingly man-made, things of that sort. But they won't do the same with downticks in temperature. And so I'm just simply pointing out an inconsistency. If that brief downturn in global average temperature about 2 years ago was not evidence against, then a brief upturn is not evidence for. What we need to be doing is looking at very long-term data and looking for real trends rather than anomalies in the trends. And the long-term data do show us that the Earth's average surface atmospheric temperature has risen by roughly 1 degree Celsius since about the middle of the 19th century. And I think that human emissions of carbon dioxide have contributed to that, but the notion that it's catastrophic, the notion that it is overwhelmingly human, man-made, those notions I think are not well established in the actual evidence.
Okay, so we need to be careful not to fall into misleading information, basically, is what you're saying, whether it comes to social media or headlines. So, how can the average viewer know what headline to trust?
Well, the self-serving answer for me would be to say, come to cornwallalliance.org, cornwallalliance.org. But, really, the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test all things, hold fast what is good. So this is why when we post things on the Cornwall Alliance's website, we make sure that we have links to sources of outstanding scholarly work so that people are able to check the figures for themselves, check the data. That's part of what we're supposed to do as Christians. And that's really the heart of what it is to be scientific. The Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman said that the key to science is that when we have a hypothesis, a guess as to how something works in nature, we set up experiments to see whether what would happen if our guess were right really does happen. And if the observations that come from the experiment, whether in the laboratory or out in the real world, if the observations contradict the prediction, then our guess, our hypothesis, even our theory is wrong. And it doesn't matter how smart we are or how beautiful our guess was or anything else. If observation contradicts theory, then the theory is wrong, and we have to go back to the drawing board. And that's what we get essentially in terms of the claims of very rapid, potentially catastrophic global warming. Those claims are all based not on empirical observations, but on computer models of how the atmosphere responds to added CO2. And the models, on average, predict 2 to 3 times as much warming as actually observed over the relevant period. That means the models are wrong, and they really need correcting.
Well, so you mentioned CO2, and we were talking about headlines. So headlines tell us that CO2 emissions from fossil fuels is the main cause of global warming. But you disagree with this claim, right?
Well, I think it's actually theoretically possible that that's true. What I think is that the best empirical evidence indicates that it's probably not true. Notice I said probably. I think in many, many different scientific things, we're quite mistaken to speak with total confidence and assurance. I would be wrong to say, well, it's a settled matter that CO2 from fossil fuels is not the primary cause of warming. I also think it's wrong to say, well, the science is settled. CO2 is the primary cause from burning fossil fuels. Here's why I say what I do. It's precisely because the computer models of global climate predict 2 to 3 times as much warming as actually has been observed in response to the added CO2 in the atmosphere, that we know, therefore, that the models are wrong, that they are over-predicting the amount of influence that CO2 has on global average temperature. When we look back through the history of global temperatures, we see that there have been very similar periods of warming in the past, such as the Minoan warm period, the Roman warm period, the medieval warm period. We've also seen cooling periods in the past, and the interesting thing is that although there is a correlation between temperature and CO2 content in the atmosphere, the correlation is the opposite of what you would think it would be if CO2 were the control knob for temperature. That is, temperature changes first, CO2 changes later. And the reason for that is that as the ocean warms, it outgasses CO2. Ocean water contains CO2. The warmer it is, the less CO2 it keeps in mixture. The colder it is, the more CO2 it holds. So as the temperature changes first, the CO2 follows.
Wow. You are very much a scientist, I could tell. Now, I don't know how it is in the US. I know that our federal government here, and you're probably aware of this, but our federal government here is requiring that all provinces put a carbon tax into place. Do you think that this will produce any positive results?
No, I think it will not produce positive results. And the fundamental reason is this, that a carbon tax assumes that adding carbon dioxide, and by the way, it's very deceptive to speak of it as a carbon tax because carbon is an element, and in its solid form, it's a black nasty dust, and it can be a problem. Okay, carbon dioxide is not carbon; it is carbon plus 2 atoms of oxygen. It's an odorless, colorless gas that is non-toxic at concentrations 20 times what they are in our present atmosphere. And it is absolutely essential to life. Plants need it for photosynthesis. And the more of it there is, the better plants grow. So treating carbon dioxide as a pollutant is actually, I think, quite the opposite of what it really is. The more CO2 there is in the air, the better plants grow, and that means there's more food for everything that eats plants or eats something else that does eat plants. So the result is a huge increase in crop yields around the world. This has been studied in literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies showing that we have seen an increase in crop yields measured in terms of about $3.2 trillion of extra food from 1960 to 2012, and we can expect about another $9.8 trillion worth of food just because we've added CO2 to the atmosphere from 2012 to 2050. So you don't tax something that you want more of, you reward it instead. So no, a carbon tax would not be a good idea.
Oh, wow. Now, Dr. Weissner, you believe that the current global response to climate change actually could have some implications, especially for the poor, right?
I do. And that's simply because everything that we produce, we do it using energy. It takes energy to grow food, to process food, to transport food, to make clothing, to make shelter, to have communication. We're using energy right now in this Skype call. It takes vast amounts of energy to lift and keep whole societies out of poverty. Now, the less expensive energy is, the more of it people can use. And in fact, historically, it has been access to abundant, affordable energy, primarily through fossil fuels, coal, petroleum, and natural gas, that has lifted and kept whole societies out of poverty. If we're going to fight allegedly catastrophic, allegedly overwhelmingly man-made global warming by pushing fossil fuels out of our energy mix, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to raise the cost of energy because the fossil fuels are the cheapest source aside from nuclear and hydro. They're much cheaper than wind and solar when you count everything into the price. But two, we're also going to make that energy less reliable. The wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining. And because of that, you don't have a steady input of energy into the electric grid. That means you have an unstable grid. The more unstable it is, the more you're going to have brownouts and blackouts, and those things kill.
Now, a lot of Western nations are phasing out coal. How much of a problem is coal to the environment?
Well, if you burn coal in a really sloppy way, coal burning can be a very big problem to the environment. But in all developed countries, we have adopted ways of burning coal to generate electricity that are extremely clean. And essentially, the only thing that comes out of the misnamed smokestacks of coal-fired generating plants in developed countries is water vapor. It's just simply steam from the turbines and the cooling towers. Nothing else comes out. So coal can be badly used, and sometimes it is in very poor countries. And yet the interesting thing that happens, and we see this through the history of our environments and of our economies as well, is that even while air pollution rises in the early stages of economic development, as countries begin to use coal and can't yet afford the very, very highly efficient ways of using it, even while the air pollution rises, life expectancy rises too. And what that means is that the benefits of all of the economic development, driven in part by the use of coal, outweigh the risks. And then as people get wealthy enough, they can afford to adopt the cleaner technologies of using coal, and then you get rid of the pollution, and at the same time you have the benefits of that economic development.
Dr. Beisner, we're out of time, but thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your expertise with us.
Well, thank you very much, and your listeners can learn more at cornwallalliance.org.
Many of you watching today have either experienced the tragedy of suicide in your own family or you know someone who has. Today's guest has an incredible, powerful story to share with us. Tamara LaRue is the co-founder of Life Change International and author of A Second Chance at Heaven, and she joins me now via Skype from Houston, Texas. Tamara, welcome to BCN.
Thank you, Hal. It's good to be here.
Can you briefly share your story? While still in high school, you tried to commit suicide. In reality, you should not be here with us today, right?
That's true. And anyone who has made it through high school knows that the ups and downs can be quite crazy every day in high school. And one of the things that we talk about is in my season of high school really didn't play a part, I don't believe, in my suicide. It was elongated. It was an elongated journey of feeling empty, feeling rejected over and over and over, ever since I was 4 years old, going through the brokenness of a home, going through just having a void that could not be filled. And high school certainly added to it with the ups and downs of the social acceptances. And I had a lot of friends in high school. And I was part of each group in high school. And so it was quite surprising to people because they did not know how I was silently suffering inside. And that's why I appreciate you allowing me to come on and share, because we have millions of people who are silently suffering in depression and contemplating suicide because they're so broken on the inside and they don't have anywhere to turn.
You know, psychologists I've spoken with in the past, they say when people talk about suicide all the time, those aren't the ones you should be concerned about. It's the ones who are quiet and you don't hear from.
That's true. And oftentimes psychologists label people who go through depression and suicide as a mental state, or it's a mental problem. And I personally disagree. I believe it is more of a spiritual problem before it becomes a mental and emotional problem. And until we address the spiritual issues that actually forms our thought process, and our thoughts form our emotions. And if we don't go down to the foundation of our spiritual condition, we will not be able to provide solutions for people who are suffering from depression.
Now, Tamara, you actually shot yourself. Where did you shoot yourself?
I did. I wanted how to definitely accomplish my goal. There was no turning back for me. I was in such a state of hopelessness and despair. I was so empty. I could not imagine living life any longer with the pain and agony I felt. And so I took a .38 caliber gun and I placed it at my heart. And that .38 caliber gun missed my heart less than 1/4 of an inch.
Wow.
Say that it is an absolute miracle. They have no idea why I am alive and survived it.
Now, you actually saw heaven and hell?
I did, Hal. I actually, when I took that .38 caliber gun and placed it at my chest and the gun went off, I experienced becoming blind and becoming deaf. And my soul left my body and I began traveling faster than the speed of light. And I began falling and falling and falling. And I landed in this place. It was hell. And many people doubt that the place exists, but I am here to testify that it is a very real place. And it is a place of torment that you cannot explain. The emotional pain that I was in is not even a speck of sand compared to the torment that is in that place. It is horrific. There are no words to describe the suffering. It was every molecule of my being was being tortured. It was like an acidic burn that was being poured all over my head from the inside out and the outside in. And all you could do was scream in agony and in being tortured.
Now, you also got a glimpse of heaven as well. And did you see Jesus?
That's the biggest question everyone always asks me is, did I see Jesus? You know, when you are outside of your body, the veil of the physical world is ripped off. And my knowledge was made complete. I knew who God was. I knew that Jesus Christ was the King. I knew from that point on that everything that I was experiencing was because of the absence of his presence. I could look out across the great divide and I could see heaven. I could see all of heaven and I could see the Lord upon the throne, but I was not allowed to see things in detail. And I was crying out and screaming out in agony for the Lord to send somebody back to earth to tell them the truth. And everybody around me, there were people all through hell that you could see as far as the eye would take you that were screaming out in the same capacity. And the only thing that mattered was that Jesus Christ was Lord. I knew every sin that they had committed. I knew their lineage. I knew where they were from. Every knowledge, all I had to do was think a thought and my knowledge was made full. And so when I could look out again across and I could see the heavens, I knew that the very presence of God himself was what my heart was longing for. And I cried out for that and begged God to forgive me.
So Tamara, when you took that gun, put it to your chest, pulled the trigger, your mother found you? What happened when she did?
She did. She came in and she found me, and it was no mother should ever have to go through. It was horrific for her. And when she found me, she called the ambulance. And when they got there, they were like, are you even going to bother to take her to the hospital? Because I was gray with the pallor of death. But what they didn't know was that I had left hell. God had actually picked me up when I was there, took me across the heavens, and had brought me back. And so now I was alive and I was filled with hope because I knew the truth. And my mom was absolutely devastated. And I was reassuring her that everything is going to be okay. And she was like, no, you're dying. And I was like, no, I'm okay. Because I knew I had already experienced death and had been given a second chance to live.
Wow. Now, you write in your book, A Second Chance at Heaven, that there was nothing unusual about the day you finally decided to kill yourself. What led to that decision finally? Was it the depression? No escape?
It was the no escape. It was the reality that no matter what I do, no matter what I try, the void on the inside of me will not go away. I cannot fill this void because I didn't understand that it's a relationship with God. It's this presence of the Holy Spirit that actually fills that void. And I knew God existed, but I didn't have that relationship. I didn't surrender my heart to his lordship. And I didn't understand it's the pursuit of righteousness that fills that void. And so being desperate, I had decided that I don't know what will fill this void, and I cannot live life this empty, this broken, and in torment forever.
Now, you say that your father never totally rejected you, but his actions left a distinct impression. How so?
Well, he was busy. You know, he was a father of 6 children, and he was at work. He was a workaholic. He worked all the time. I lived in a different city. And when I was around him, it was all about work. It was all about the other kids. It was all about his schedule. And I never felt like I belonged. I always felt like a stranger in my own house because of that lack of connection that I had with my father and with the rest of my family.
Now, there are many young people who feel overwhelmed by the circumstances of life, Tamara. Why do some people find ways to cope with it while others struggle? What do you think?
I believe it's the spiritual foundation that each individual has. Where they know where to turn to, when they know that God not only listens, but he definitely answers prayer. I believe it's having people that are encouraging you to follow after righteousness. And people who do not have that end up going down a farther, darker end because they don't have the answer. And the answer isn't, oh, just go to church, learn about God. The answer is get on your knees and develop a relationship with God. And I believe those who are able to overcome depression, overcome suicidal thoughts, are those who understand how to take the word and renew their mind and become transformed by the power of God's word.
Recent statistics say that suicide is up among women in North America. Why do you believe it's increasing?
I believe there's several factors that are involved in why it is increasing. I believe we're having an identity crisis. Women don't know where to find their identity. When you have pornography on a rise, you have drug addiction on a rise, you have sexual abuse on a rise in astronomical numbers. Women are looking at Hollywood. They think that they're supposed to be sex symbols. They find their identity through a career and through a job. And through these misconcepts, these false perceptions, they don't know that their identity is found in Christ. It's found in their Creator. And I believe that causes a deep depression because they don't have a sense of belonging, a sense of value. And when you realize the love that God has for you, the value that you have in God, it completely changes your perception.
Now, as you look back, is there anything your mom or friends could have done differently to prevent you from taking the action that you did?
I don't believe so because, as I was saying earlier, my problem was more spiritual before it was mental and emotional. And until I took full responsibility of who and what I choose to become, the choice is mine, life and death. And until I chose life, I was suffering on the inside. And there is no relationship, there is no human being that can meet my spiritual needs. It only comes through the Holy Spirit and through Christ. And so I can't expect other people to fulfill the need that only God can fill.
Tamara, let me ask you something. Do you have children yourself? And if so, how old are they?
I do. I have 3 children. I have a grown son who's in his early 30s, and I have 2 teenage girls.
There you go. So what message would you give to your teenage girls so they don't take the same path that you took?
I encourage them that they are loved, to know how much they are loved, not only by me, not only by the words of the people around them, but by who their Creator is. I teach them value, and I teach them to follow the words of truth and righteousness and not what people say.
How does a person's belief system really impact their quality of life?
I think it makes a complete difference. Their quality of life, whether you choose life or you choose death, you choose poverty, whatever you're choosing in life determines your thought process. And when you are a Christ follower and you believe his promises, you believe that he has promised to have goodness for you laid out. It doesn't mean we're not going to go through difficult situations. It doesn't mean we're not going to go through trials and through problems. But those promises are real. And when you believe in those promises, then you have hope. You have your answer. You know that no matter what you're facing, goodness is on the other side. And when you don't have that source, you don't have anything solid to stand on.
When you tried to take your own life, did you notice that people treated you differently, maybe kept their distance, or were they more supportive?
Absolutely, we're not more supportive. The stigma of suicide stuck with me for a really long time, even today, because I am so vocal upon it. But I know the truth, and knowing the truth truly sets you free. And I don't live by the opinion of men. I live to the audience of one. And knowing that it is my goal is to please my Heavenly Father, is to please my Lord and Savior, gives me the confidence to go forward. It gives me the ability to look past people's judgment and look at them from compassion because they don't understand. And those that have walked this journey understand. And so it opens up an opportunity for me to share how to overcome on every basic day-to-day level, overcoming the problems of life. And being able to take the word and apply it in a realistic sense and not it be some fairy tale, but that it's real.
Now, the name of your book is called A Second Chance at Heaven. You say we all need second chances, Tamara. What would you say to a person struggling with self-esteem or a sense of hopelessness?
I would tell them that there is an answer. And the answer is found in not knowing that God is real, but surrendering your heart to his lordship, picking up the word and finding every promise that God has made to you and believing in it, believing that it is for you, believing that you're loved, because there is a solution to every problem that you are going through. And there are greener pastures on the other side.
And what advice would you give to parents who have teenagers who may also have suicidal tendencies or thoughts?
I would encourage them to lead their children in having a relationship with God, teaching them to go to the scriptures, studying the scriptures, reading the book of Proverbs, reading Psalms, reading those scriptures that tell us how to live life. give us the instructions of life, showing us how to love, and being able to open our hearts to receive God's love, and instructing their children in the ways of righteousness, because that is truly where the answers are found, is in following after righteousness.
Tamara LaRue is the author of A Second Chance at Heaven. Thanks for joining me today via Skype from Houston, Texas.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.